Everyone, welcome to the Democratic Caucus. It is Tuesday, April 7th. I don't know if anyone stayed up to watch that Gary basketball game last night. It was very fun. And I'm Lori Houghton, and I represent Essex Junction. We have a couple things on the agenda today. We're going to hear, I call it the salt bill, I should probably not call it the salt bill, but at my list, it is S218. We're also going to hear from the Ways and Means Chair on H 955, which is the education bill. And then we're going to have some discussion on S 325 slash Act 181. But before that, I just have a couple announcements. We had a conversation this morning with legal counsel, all leadership did, and they're making the plea that, as you know, they are nonpartisan and they pride themselves on that. What they're finding, though, is that some of the requests for floor amendments are coming in with very little time, like in some cases 15 minutes, which is fine, and they want to do the work, but sometimes they're triple booked. And it just becomes an issue that they're maybe not able to do it in that short period of time. They will, but they're asking us to please tell all members, so this is across the board, that if the more time you can give them, the better, and do understand when they say they're triple booked. And if you have, if they say they can't do it, which I doubt they will, but you feel there's some concern, come find one of us in leadership and we will help you through the process. And the other thing they mentioned is that some members have been coming with a draft done by AI. And the member has said, well, here, it's already done. That they don't use those. They are not helpful. And so we ask that you do not provide them a draft from AI and think that that's what's going to get drafted. Any questions on that? Concerns? Okay, great. Also, we're doing a press conference today at 1 p.m. on H 955, specifically what has come out of House Ed. So if you can be there at 1 o'clock, that would be great. Okay, any member announcements? I know. That's all.
Yeah, thanks. Representative Olson. I Representative Agravoni and I have been talking about a little amendment around school closure, but I'm not going to get into it a whole lot because I haven't had a chance to talk to Representative Conlon about it. But I just wanted to keep the folks heads up that we're going to be talking about something kind of similar to what we saw on the floor last year, but need to talk through the details, and I definitely want to talk to President Merrill first.
Great. Thank you. You can go to Karen. Does anyone else have any other announcements before we get started? Okay, great. So we're going to start with S218, an act relating to reducing fluoride contamination of state waters with Representative June.
Morning, fellow Chapin. I represent East Montpelier and Middlesex, and I'm going to be talking about Salt Bill, also better known as the Fluoride Contamination Reduction Program. So just a reminder that we worked on this bill in House Environment last year in great detail, and probably gave this same talk to our caucus last year because we thought we were moving forward with the bill. And then in the end, it did not come to the floor. And so now it has basically exactly the same bill that we worked in depth on in the House. That language was utilized in the Senate. And so we are recommending to pass this bill as passed by the Senate. And that is because we did a lot of the work to develop that content. The one piece that held up the bill at the end of last year and has been changed is related to limited liability. So I'll get to that piece in a minute. That's the one thing that's changed from the version that we worked on in our committee last year. So this bill addresses the way salt is applied to roads, sidewalks, and other surfaces, and the resulting fluoride contamination that we're now seeing in our waters, both groundwaters and surface waters of the state. The problem is that Vermont is one of the highest users of salt, probably because we have some of the highest experiences with ice, like in the world, not just in the United States. So There's certain states in the United States that utilize salt on our roads in addition to other products, and we are one of the highest users. So and this has radically increased. I'm sure, we've all noticed over the decades, salt wasn't used at all until about 80 years ago. And really it's over the last like 15 to 20 years that use of salt has radically ramped up. And salt, as you know, is water soluble, and it changes the salinity and the pH of water. So when that happens, that gets into our waterways, it's really doing three main things that are problematic for Vermonters. One is it's damaging our infrastructure. It damages bridges. I'm sure you all know it damages cars and vehicles, and it also damages pipes, costing Vermonters money. Our V-Trans increases costs significantly. It also affects drinking water in some cases by leaching lead and other heavy metals out of pipes. So that change in pH has an impact on what comes out of pipes that water's running through. And then the one that we're really quite aware of also is it's polluting our waterways, particularly our damaging aquatic ecosystems and organisms. And we have limits on how much salinity, how much salt can be in waters because of that. We already have 8 streams in Vermont that are in the process of developing a TMDL, total maximum daily load, where we will be required to make changes in those watersheds. So this is really this bill is really a preventive measure because we know we are polluting our waterways to get at this statewide. So the solution that this bill proposes is a voluntary salt reduction program. It utilizes best management practices and certification in those best management practices for commercial salt applicators. Municipalities and the state already follow or already have access. The state already has developed best management practices for utilizing salt on state highways and roads, and trains through the local roads program municipal salt applicators in utilizing those best management practices. So this bill extends a new program to commercial salt applicators. And then, so it provides the best management practices, and then the state would provide training for commercial salt applicators like they do for municipal salt applicators, and this voluntary certification program that commercial salt applicators could utilize. And then landowners could, and property owners could request or try and seek a salt applicator that has that certification if they want to be really thoughtful in how much salt is being applied. And then the carrot to balance this is limited liability through an affirmative defense, which would be provided to municipal and commercial salt applicators who have, including employees, who have the appropriate training, certification, and keep records as required in the bill. This is really an incentive to get certified and utilize those practices, and then acknowledges that there's an appropriate balance between utilizing salt to address safety issues while not using excess salt that's unnecessary for safety and ends up contaminating the waters of our state. So there is also a section in the bill to do education, for the state to do education and outreach to salt applicators, to the general public, that purchase of salt for personal use, and trying to help the public to understand their own personal use of salt and that overuse has implications and negative effects. And then there's also a section that requires ANR to do with the Agency of Natural Resources to report back on salt and sand storage. Particularly, we're concerned about uncovered salt storage. It would inventory state and municipal salt and sand storage facilities, look at those that are within 100 feet of surface waters and whether they're covered or not, as well as how many are outside of 100 feet from the surface water. And it would estimate the cost to cover the remaining storage facilities that are currently uncovered that have salt. I think that's where I'll leave it. There's definitely some details about exactly what an affirmative defense is and how it is different from the liability provisions that were in the previous bill. If anybody wants details on that, I'd actually probably point you towards our judiciary committee, but I can probably answer some basic questions The vote needed. The vote was 8-3-0. I think that, I mean, I don't want to speculate a whole lot about why you vote against a voluntary certification program when we have other areas of the state that are now going to have requirements because of the salinity is causing enough pollution that we have to act under EPA. I think a voluntary program is a really great direction, but some folks were just really concerned about adding anything new to our Agency of Natural Resources.
Right, and it's in House Appropriations right now. We have some questions.
Can I say one?
Yes.
When do you expect it to be on the floor?
I think that's up to appropriations.
Yeah, it's in House Appropriations.
Okay.
They only take a day or two to be on the floor at the end of this week.
Okay, so I'll just say, it'd be great to hear if folks have concerns or thoughts about it now, so help us move it forward.
So, just a second. Appropriations is scheduled to take it up tomorrow after the floor.
Sean Sweeney, Shelburne, St. George. Great. I was just wondering what the alternative's gonna be then, if we're not using salt. Do we give the towns the approval? What's next?
Sure. Best management practices for salt utilization do not include not utilizing salt for safety reasons. So it really is about appropriate levels of applying salt, as well as using some salt alternatives like brines. There are like now new equipment and materials rather than just rock salt thrown out of the back of the truck that are advancing this technology and making it easier for us to appropriately apply the minimum amount of salt to meet the safety needs.
Thanks, Tom.
Kate Lally, Shelburne. I remember saying last year when we discussed this bill that I thought this was one of the most important things we have ever done in my tenure in this body, and I stand by that. I'm so glad this is happening. So I serve on House Transportation, and we spend a lot of time learning about this issue and the opportunities that exist at the state that could be kind of downsized to our municipalities and also to commercial applicators. There's some really, really good stuff going on. V-Trans has figured out how to use, down to a extraordinary level, just incredible efficiencies for how this is done. And so I would love to see this opened up to the rest of the state. And as a town that has a couple of streams that are teetering on the TDML status, this is not something we want more of in our state.
Thanks for noting that. I'll also just mention that New Hampshire enacted a program for commercial salt applicators 10 years ago. And this very much mirrors what's already happening both at our state level with our state agency and our local roads program for municipalities, as well as the commercial salt applicator program in New Hampshire, which has been very successful.
Angela Arstein, listen, I don't have a question. I just
Okay. Good.
All right.
We're back.
Keep going.
We've been having issues. I just been ignoring it and letting that.
Go ahead, Angela.
So the crystals, the affirmative defense is just so that if a person who is a commercial salt applicator following best management practices does exactly what they are supposed to do, they will have to keep a log of what they're doing. But if they are doing what they're supposed to do, and then someone does happen to slip, fall, or hurt themselves on, the property that's being salted, it's an affirmative defense for that property owner, or, if the owner isn't the applicator,
but they're using an applicator who's certified, all those things, then it's an affirmative defense to say, we did exactly what we were supposed to do, and they will not be held liable. There's one other question. I had a question, maybe you should talk is, because the vote was 8-3, it sounds like there's some opposition to it. Wondering if you could speak to that at all, so we can help see kind of what the debate might be on the floor.
Sure. What I recall, some of the concerns was one, just more government, wanting to not create more government programs. And two, that some people feel it's not been that effective in other places because we don't necessarily see a perfect correlation with lowering our use of salt on roads and driveways with a lower salinity in streams. And we know that that salt gets stuck in that stream bed and releases over time. We don't actually expect scientifically to see an immediate corresponding lowering of salinity. But I'll just go back to, there are so many reasons to use less salt. It's not just to protect our streams, it's also to protect our bridges and our roads and our cars and our drinking water. And so scientifically, you can know that by lowering the amount of salt we're applying, there is less salt in our systems. So those are the only two things I heard in opposition.
Hi, I'm Shay Waters Evans from Charlotte. And I did not know what a commercial salt applicator is. Can you give some examples, please?
Sure. So a commercial salt applicator would be a private entity that offers services to spread salt on roads, driveways, sidewalks, or anywhere that a property owner might hire them to do that. And so they are a private business as opposed to municipalities that have salt crews out there salting roads and
It's like
sidewalks. Parking lots, private roads, driveways would be some of the key places that a commercial salt applicator might be operating.
Thank you.
Another question.
I'm Candace White from Waitsfield. I just want to speak also in huge support for this bill. And I want to share that I spent a lot of time in a region of the Adirondacks, Lake George, which is considered to be one of the cleanest lakes in the world. They have a very progressive salt program that they started about 10 years ago, working with municipalities and private applicators to keep the lake clean. And not only does it do all these incredible benefits for the water quality and the ecosystem, it also saves money. Salt is very expensive. We have a salt shortage in Vermont this year. But there are case studies like in Plattsburgh, New York, the local municipal plow guy in charge of all the plows, saving money and keeping the roads safe. So it really should be a slam dunk. I'm really happy we're doing this. I would love to see, I guess, maybe next year. I know we have a voluntary program for our municipalities to train with V-Trans, but taking that next step and pushing them is more of a required, because again, it just saves money and saves time and it's kind of a win-win. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I really do think this is a win-win because anybody who's applying salt is incredibly expensive, as many of us experienced. Municipalities had shortages and have access to salt in some parts of the state this winter. So this is a win-win to reduce use, save money, and still protect public safety.
All right, last question.
I have a question. I just, this is your last agriculture, so I can speak to several of the members that voted against this bill, and their belief is that when you do something, you pass something that's voluntary, the next step is that it will be mandated. So that might explain why they voted no.
Thank you so much. All right, next we have Representative Kornheiser, who's going to talk about H955 and Act relating to next steps in transforming Vermont's education system. If you all remember, it's passed out of House Ed last week on a 7-4 vote. Chair Conlon did a caucus of the whole. So now Representative Kornheiser is going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in Ways and Means.
Hi, everyone. Emily Kornheiser, representative from Brattleboro, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee.
I am not here to re-explain the parts that the education committee did, so if anyone has questions about the underlying bill, we do have Representative Conlon here, and he is always available to you with for any questions you might have at any time. So, good morning, everybody.
Happy birthday.
Maybe don't ask him any questions till tomorrow. So House Ways and Means has been working on a number of next steps that were outlined in Act 73 for the whole session leading up to this moment. And then we have other components that are responsive explicitly to the language that came over to us from House Education. And all of that is going to be folded into the bill. Our agenda this week has nothing but this bill, which I can't ever remember if it's 955 or 995. 955. That's what our agenda looks like. And so if you have questions about sort of sub-agendas, ask someone on the committee about which different pieces we're looking at. We've been working with those different components of language separately up until now because there's 3 different staff on it and it's hard for them if it's all in one bill. But tomorrow morning, we're going to start looking at all the language as one comprehensive piece. But it's going to be instances of amendment rather than a strike all amendment. So you'll be able to see all those instances of amendment all in one place tomorrow morning. So what are those pieces? That's a really good question. So one of them is, they're sort of in a few different buckets. One of them are next steps to make sure that districts have all of the funding that they need under the future foundation formula. So that includes changes, little tweaks to the foundation formula, next steps. And then also there's a whole range of categorical grants that go to districts that cover costs that are separate from that district's education spending and separate from the foundation formula. And so some of our work is related to that. So we have language about special education and next steps on special education funding to ensure that the next steps that we're looking at for analysis for special education funding will meet maintenance of effort requirements for the federal government. And that's work that we've worked really closely with the Special Educators Association on. We have our next steps on our tax classifications work. That's the work to tax second homes at a different rate than other non-homestead properties and different than homestead properties. That is a multi-year process. We're probably in year 3 of a 5-year timeline to implement that because there's a lot that needs to be done to identify actually what those properties are and what they're not in order to understand what that base is. We understand what our overall grand list is. That's our base for our property taxes. We need to understand what the base of the second homes are in order to set a rate in a couple of years in the future. And so this year we have finalized language for sort of what is a second home and what is not a second home. If a property is mixed use, how do we handle that mixed use? We've done all of that. And then next year, the tax department will start with having paperwork that's filed by each property owner related to that. And then from there, we'll know what our base is to set a rate in future years. We are continuing our work on reappraisals in regional assessment districts. This was a big part of Act 73 and a big part of legislation actually the year before that to make sure that our properties throughout the state, no matter what town you're in, are being appraised consistently and fairly so that our statewide grand list is indeed fair from district to district. This should also lessen our reliance on the dreaded CLA, which some of you spend a lot of time talking to constituents about, and some of you might have never thought about before. School construction and school debt. So school debt being districts carrying debt from past school construction projects. And then school construction to the future is a key component of any education transformation process, both so that kids can be getting their education in high quality, dynamic environments so that staff, teachers can be teaching in high quality environments. And because we know that any work to be doing education governance differently, any effort to be operating at scale means that we might need newer, better buildings in maybe even different locations than they are right now.
And so right now, Ways and Means is finishing sort of a first walkthrough on school construction language that puts together a bunch of different pieces. How districts would pay that debt, how past debt would be paid, how we use state bonding capacity, how we use local bonding capacity, how we use public-private partnerships, how we use partners. And we're really building on some work that happened in Prince George County in Maryland, and the great work that I think we've all heard a lot about from Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And so that's how do we do school construction, how do we do district debt in the context of a foundation formula? And that language is in committee right now. That's probably the language that we're going to need to spend the most time on this week and is a real key component of this work. Reserve guidance, we want to make sure that we have a consistent way of understanding, that districts have consistent sort of accounting principles as we're moving towards more consistent funding from district to district. We are finishing the work on pre-K that went from the Human Services Committee to the Education Committee and now to the Ways and Means Committee, just to make sure that the continued work we need to do on that, we're getting the information we need. We're working on transportation funding language. The way we fund transportation right now for school districts is both really remarkably inconsistent from district to district. There's big questions of equity, and it is a key piece of both moving to a foundation formula and moving to greater scale. We've had a great partnership with the House Transportation Committee, and we have a little informal working group between the two committees that have come up with some next steps for us. We're going to be looking at that language tomorrow. We're going to continue work on the foundation formula, what contingencies should need to be in there, and how we clarify what next steps looks like in relationship to that. We're going to finish the work that House Education did on updates to the appropriations before we send that over to the Appropriations Committee. We also have a few pieces of rulemaking that we need to finalize to make sure that we are getting all the guidance that we need from both the State Board and the Agency of Education, as well as data requests related to those two things, as well as tightening how we receive data about how we count students from district to district, depending on where they go to school. And then the last part, which was a little bit of a surprise, I think, for many members of the committee, is as the Education Committee moved to the structure that the bill came to us in, with CSAs and then these really carefully brokered voluntary mergers, I think the committee was assuming that our work ahead would be to create tax incentives and tax penalties in order to sort of urge that work along, right? That's how Act 46 was structured. That was sort of an assumption that we went into our work on. We took testimony from a few districts, and I think we all had a lot more conversations from there about whether or not those were effective with Act 46, and the overall takeaway was no. Those were not effective. And for me, the biggest sort of aha moment related to that was one school board member told us that did really was sort of at the front of the new school districts under Act 46, that the school board member said, we got those tax incentives. They were exciting at first. And then when they went away, everyone assumed that our taxes had gone up because we had moved to a new district structure. So that when a tax incentive goes away, a normal person sees their tax bill go up and they think, oh, what have they done to me? And so that was a real help to us. And so we are not putting in tax penalties or tax incentives to support mergers, but we are assuming that when the foundation formula is fully enacted, we will be able to move to the new tax structure that is outlined in Act 73, which enables us, as the second homes go into effect, as the new property tax credit goes into effect, to lower the property taxes of the vast majority of Vermonters, as well as moving the homestead rate to what would be the lowest homestead rate in the state at that point. So that everyone will have a very similar tax rate, and no one's tax rate would go up from that, even though many districts' spending would be able to go up. So that's where we are on the tax policy. That was a bunch of different pieces, all of those components that might sound a little scattered. as I say them out loud, were all in the speaker's education update that was sent out on Friday. So if you did not take studious notes of the words that came out of my mouth, you can look there, or I'm happy to forward it, the email to you. Yes. I'm gonna stop talking.
Great. Any questions?
Thanks, Kathleen James from Manchester. I have a question and a comment. The question is about the new tax classification for second homes. Just because I'm getting questions on it. And I support this policy, by the way, so I'm glad we're moving in that direction. I think I'm right to assume that you said you do have a definition of what second homes are and aren't. Is that irrespective of how they're used? I'm thinking of a family that comes up on the weekends versus somebody that lives there for 5 months and 29 days versus somebody who's got it out on the short-term rental market all the time.
So yes, the language for tax classifications, we really mostly finished maybe a month ago even. So folks can look at that. And we played actually a really fun game in committee that I'm happy to share, that we're happy to share around that Charlie developed. In order to make sure we weren't leaving any property types out, but sort of quick and dirty, a camp is not included in the definition of a second home. A second home needs to be able to be lived in all year round. However, if someone has a homestead that they're living in all year round, and a person walking by might not say that it's weatherized, it still counts as a primary home. So the primary thing that determines a primary home is that someone's living in it all year round. No matter if it is a camper or a tent or a yurt or a shack down by the river, that makes it a primary home if someone is using it as a primary home. To define something as a second home, it needs to be not a camp. It needs to be able to be lived in all year round, weatherized. It needs to not be rented out to someone for the majority of the year, because then it would be a rental property, a long-term rental property, and not be used as a commercial property. And so that would include a vacation home that is only used a couple weekends a year, and would also include something that was mostly on the short-term rental market. Both of those would be defined as a second home. And we can send the language around if folks want to get sort of deeper in the weeds.
Thanks. And then just a quick comment. I am surprised to hear that tax incentives anecdotally were not effective, I guess, during the Act 46 process. And so this is just my my wish list, which is that sometime between now and the end of the session, because there's a long road for this bill to go before it hits the finish line, whether there is thinking we could be doing or that we've already done and that I missed about making sure from the get-go that we are gathering data on the impacts and outcomes of this education reform work, so that down the road, we can do the kind of analysis that we've never been able to do on Act 46. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, for tax appeals, property tax appeals, will that go through the local BCA or will that go to a state organization?
Yes, both things. It depends. So under the new regional assessment district system, there's a sort of a series of appeals that essentially whoever made the initial decision about the value of that property is the first round of appeal, and then it goes up from there, because something should not be appealed to someone who is not responsible for the decision at first. Separately, second homes and property tax classifications is not part of the assessment process. It's not about the value of a property, it's about the use of a property. And those appeals go through the standard homestead, non-homestead appeal process. It's just adding sort of a new third category to go through that process.
Just to clarify, then they would not go to the local BCA, they'd go to a state, agency or whatever.
So the property classification, which is about the use of the property, not the value of the property. Though there's an existing appeal process, that is usually sort of a conversation between the local clerk or the local treasurer and the tax department, but the tax department is responsible for it. And if folks want to appeal, there's also a system for if you thought you were going to use your property in one way, and let's say you were living in it for the first month of the year and then you get this really great job offer somewhere else, you can change the way, even under current law, you can change the way your property is going to be used and move to a non-homestead.
Robert Butler from Burlington. There was concern in Burlington that moving to the foundation formula would lead to a large loss of revenue. I think the estimate was close to $20 million. And I'm wondering if that is likely to happen, and if so, is there a transition plan to go from current level to much lower level?
The best way I have to talk about this is with fruit, and so I'm sorry. Many years ago, when we passed Act 60, people who were in the building described it as the spreadsheet wars. I don't know if you remember how dot matrix printers, the printouts would all be attached to each other. You had to sort of, they were perforated, you had to separate them. And I always imagine people sort of like running down the hallways with these like printouts, looking for the best deal for their districts. And sometimes when we are trying to understand the impact of our work, we wind up trying to compare apples to pomegranates. And that's what happened in this case. So when district by district comparisons were kicked off around the foundation formula, we were comparing the foundation formula to current education spending, but the foundation formula was not designed to take into account all of the aspects of education spending. So there are aspects of current education spending, such as a lot of money on special education, money on transportation, and other pieces that are woven into our current education spending that are not included in the foundation formula, and under Act 73 were imagined to be covered by categorical grants. We are figuring out next steps on those categorical grants this year. We're going to do more work on it next year. And then there's a contingency related to the foundation formula that all of those other expenses that sort of wrap around the foundation formula are accounted for, and that they are compared to sort of current spending. And so that we can see apples to apples instead of apples to pomegranates.
Thank you.
David Durfee, Shaftesbury and Sunderland, and wanted to just pass along my recollection of Act 46 incentives. So I agree with the direction that we're taking, partly because the districts that don't participate in that or aren't able to take advantage end up paying for it. So it's counterproductive for those districts. But in one of the districts I represent, they did voluntarily merge. They got 10 cents spread out over 5 years. So not just one time, but for 5 years, the town tax rate, the ed tax rate went up by 2 cents. And for every time that happened, the town said, it's not our fault. The state is raising your tax rate by 2 cents.
Thank you. One of the things that we got really explicit about in committee related to that is that a tax incentive is paid for by everyone else. And so we can pretend it's not a penalty, but in fact, it is creating that same inadvertent penalty that you talked about.
Candace White again from Waitsfield. Thank you, Emily. And just a question on the second home tax rate. Is there another state in the country that you all are thinking and kind of modeling how our second, because I think about like Hawaii, maybe some southern states that maybe have a similar makeup of vacation homes. So are there states in mind that you're considering as you figure this out?
So Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine have far and away more second homes than any other state in the country, to the point that it's like they're in different universes. It's actually extraordinary, the scale of second homes. By some rough estimates of the tax department, 40% of all of the single family homes in Vermont are second homes. That is just, has nothing to do with what any other states outside of New England are working with. But Hawaii does have a system for taxing different properties at different rates, including second homes. They have a different system. They have a very strong county government and we do not. And so the implementation of it is different, but we have spent a lot of time talking to them and our staff have talked to their staff. Yes.
Angela Snow-Wilson. I just want to author the support for the not including tax incentives. I think, yeah, just as having served on a school board and, you know, every year we communicate. So we're losing another few cents from this and like, it just complicates things. And I think this makes a lot of sense. I know that a separate bill was introduced in your committee focused on the foundation formula and trying to take into account or find ways to take into account cost of living or cost of labor differences. And I wondered where that landed or how you're incorporating that, if at all.
So the foundation formula, in Act 73, there's a very comprehensive study to sort of update all the numbers in the foundation formula that's due to the legislature from the Joint Fiscal Office in December of 2026, so this coming December. And the contract with the consultant who's doing that work includes cost of living as one of the variables that they're looking at.
We have a question over here.
Hello, Dave Yacoboni from Morrisville. First, a clarifying question. Toward the end of your prepared comments, am I correct? Did you say, as envisioned in Act 73, several tax rates in a couple of years would decrease?
Yes, so in Act 73, we tasked the tax department, that's a hard sentence, with, as part of the report that they gave to us in December of this year related to the tax classifications, doing some preliminary estimates on how those tax rate multipliers might work for second homes. And one of the two scenarios that we asked them to lay out for us was one where the second home tax covers the revenue that would be needed in order to have a consistent homestead rate throughout the state that was set at the lowest current rate in the state. So, because there was a big concern that particularly came up in the Senate, but I know came up here as well, that while some communities would be getting more opportunities for their kids with the foundation formula, they would also be experiencing big tax bumps, and we wanted to make sure that that wouldn't happen.
Thank you. So if education expenses did not decrease, would the tax rate still go down?
Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, if we do all the things that we're supposed to do in Act 70, you know, between these multiple bills and we continue following the 12 steps laid out in front of us. But yes.
All right, two more.
Thanks so much, this is Jonathan Cooper of Powell Banksville District. And I think Representative Gagaway's question might have just got to this. My curiosity was around the second homes, that tax rate. Do we anticipate that that funding is agnostically applied throughout the state, or is it in any way sort of aware of which part of the states it is coming from, and in a way sort of returned in some proportionate measure to where it's being generated?
I love that question. Yes and yes. So right now, our existing non-homestead rate is the same rate for not every non-homestead property in the state, right? But the bill of a non-homestead payer in Pownell would be different than the bill of a non-homestead payer in Burlington because the property values are so different. And so similarly, we're anticipating a consistent second home rate throughout the state, but the bills would be varied based on the property values.
Last question.
Bishop Colchester, you can guess what I may be asking about, but you mentioned that there's conversations going on about construction and debt. What might be the status of conversations related to debt and the excess spending?
All conversations about the excess spending threshold are hanging out with S-220, a bill that we just received from the Senate and have not had a hearing on. That bill S-220 does include a real lowering of the excess spending threshold and an exemption for school construction as part of that. So we're going to take testimony on that maybe later this week and maybe next week. And then the school construction language that we're looking at has, full, right now is a full coverage for any existing debt, but, essentially as categorical grants to those districts. But that would be in a future state when we did not have the yield and all the stuff that we have now.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry, that's okay. Thank you. And thanks to the Ways and Means Committee, you guys have your work cut out for you this week. So please pay attention to what they're doing. If you have questions, reach out to them, reach out to leadership. And that was a great conversation. So thank you all. All right, last bill of the day is S325 with Representative Shaw.
Good morning, everyone. I think I will be quick. Someone just whispered in my ear. I would say that our committee is starting to do our due diligence. Act 181 is, we're taking it up in the frame of S325, which is looking to extend dates and sort of slow the process down some. But on our way to looking at that in detail, we need to actually understand how it's going. The bill, Act 181 did a lot of things, and now folks are starting to experience some of those things, and we're exploring which of them have gone well and which of them are not going so well. And I know that you are currently hearing from folks who feel that it's not going that well. So we're going to dive into all of that, and that's what we're still doing. We're just now still hearing from members of the Land Use Review Board, stakeholder groups, getting into some folks who are affected by the changes, still hearing from planning commissions about the updating process for regional plans. And that's where we are really. It's sometimes an emergency.
Yeah.
That's all, that's what I have for you today.
Any questions? No questions. Okay.
Ready for lunch?
Great. I just lunch ready. Great. Thanks, everyone.